Hello, everybody. My name is Jeremy Bramwell. I'm the president of Strata Reserve Planning. Actually, on the next page, I've got a little bit about myself. Um, Strata Reserve Planning, my report firm, is one of the oldest and largest firms in British Columbia doing depreciation reports. I've written for UBC and advised CMHC on depreciation reports. I contribute to their course. Recently, there was a committee, and I was the subject matter expert for depreciation reports for the BC Housing Policy Branch for the upcoming changes to the Strata Property Act. And we'll go through that a bit in the slide presentation. And I'm published on depreciation reports in the Real Estate Institute of BC, CHOA, Western Investor, Business Vancouver, Globe, and as well as some TV interviews. So I'll give you a bit of my experience over the next 30 minutes. The first thing I really want to talk about is what is a depreciation report? What's its purpose? So it's actually a budget planning tool. That's its purpose. It's to help stratas make informed decisions about how much money they have to save to pay for the capital repairs that are going to come into the future. So there are a lot of people kind of confuse it with other types of reports. So a maintenance manual contains information regarding the operation, servicing, repair, and decommissioning of building devices, like HVAC systems, boilers, that sort of thing. There's no financial aspect to this, so they're not really a substitute for depreciation reports. Another thing we also run into a lot of times is 2, 5, and 10 warranty reviews. So when you buy into a new strata, the 2, 5, 10 is automatic. 12 months, interior areas have to be reviewed. 15 months, the common areas. 5 years, the building envelope defects, and 10 years are major structural defects. Again, these are inspection reports, so they have nothing to do with financial planning. So again, these are not depreciation reports. And finally, I'm going to talk about BECAs. BECAs are technical reports specifically focusing on the exterior of the property. So a BECA would be if you had high rise, you would get BECAs at during your warranty thing at your 4th year and your 9th year, just before the 5-year warranty and the 10-year warranty go. And then in a high rise, probably every 10 years. In a wood frame building, it's about every 30 years, just to understand how the envelope is going along. Not so much the roof in a wood frame building, but in a high rise, the roof may be involved. But again, BECAs are not depreciation reports, and this is a common misunderstanding that we run into all the time. So people say, okay, why do I need a depreciation report? So number one is the law. It's part of the act. But the government did something very strange when they introduced them in 2009, and that they said you could defer them. So what's happened is we now have a deferral rate of over 80%. Now, most high rises are compliant and they have a report in the last 3 years, but the wood frame, bare land, industrial strata are really have a high non-compliance rate. And that was part of the reason why why the committee, the BC Housing Policy Branch, are looking at the changing of the regulations. The other reason that you should get it is depreciation reports allow much better financial planning. Yes, the fees are going to increase to meet the financial needs of the development. But the offsetting thing is that it's going to reduce the amount and the quantity of special levies. It's and as you save more money, you're going to be able to measure the financial health of your Strata Corporation by what we call percent funded or reserved adequacy. If I could ask Ryan, could you put my photo just off to the side instead of over the slide? That's great. Thank you. This is the case of, this was what we call Champlain Tower South. It was a 12-story building in Surfside that collapsed in 2021. What came out after is they had kept their CRF fees stable for over a decade. They ignored the depreciation reports, which were mandatory in Florida. And at the time, they were 7% funded. This is under, typically in British Columbia, stratas are between 10 to 25% funded. So it was underfunded even at that time. It had 700,000 in the bank, which most people would think was a lot, but it because it had deferred its maintenance, it needed $10 million worth of work. They had a special levy vote. It was defeated, and 3 months later, the building collapsed. So we call this the strata that failed financially before it failed physically. The power for depreciation report comes under Section 94 of the Strata Property Act. It says a report must be done by a qualified person. It must be obtained estimating the repair replacement costs, the Strata Corporation, and you may waive it with a 75% vote. So those are the only things it says. Under the Strata Property Act, what it says a qualified person is anybody the strata thinks is qualified. So the result of that is we have seen, I personally have seen depreciation reports done by Strata Council members, owners, tenants, property managers, realtors, the whole conundrum. So that is a real problem within the legislation that strata property owners should be working themselves to get out of. What we're expecting in the future, depreciation reports will be absolutely mandatory with no deferrals. Qualified people will be listed by designation. There'll be dates when depreciation reports are required. There's some talk about prescribed form and content, and there'll be a requirement for developers to obtain enough money to put in the CRF for the first depreciation report. And this gets back to depreciation reports should be done at the very beginning of a life of a building. This is something I think is what's going to happen when the new regulations come out. At least I think that's what's going to happen. You never know with the government what's going to happen, but this is where everybody thinks it's going to go. So who is qualified to complete a depreciation report? Well, there's two groups that complete depreciation reports. There's engineers and architects, and then there's non-engineers. So engineers, it's mainly engineers, there's not too many architects in the business, are best qualified for high rises due to the complex nature of the buildings. Well, non-engineers are better for the bare land, the townhomes, and the low rises. There's basic construction costs and technology, and replacement costs are generally static. To give you an idea, there was a report out of Toronto last year where they compared the replacement costs in a 20-story high-rise against a 30-story high-rise, and basically there was a 50% increase in prices, replacement prices, just due to those additional 10 stories. So My firm, even though I have a engineer work for me, we work on the non-engineering side of the equation. So most people don't understand this, but there's two types of depreciation reports. There's what we call an engineered report and a functional report. So an engineered report is where there's invasive testing. So invasive testing is when somebody drills into a wall or the roof, and this can only be done by an engineering firm. So it has to be signed off by an engineer. So that's what we call an engineered report. A functional report is where we look at it from a physical inspection point of view, and we review the historical documents, and that's how it did. Now, most engineers will also do a functional report, and the reason that they do a functional report is that they will come back later and say, well, you know, you need a backout, or you need invasive testing, and that's an additional fee. You know, like $5,000 to drill a hole in the wall because we think there's some moisture back there. So, you know, that is the two types of reports. We always advise people to, if you've got a mold issue or you've got a structural issue, to immediately go over and get an engineered report, get an engineer, get them to the invasive testing, and get them going. But most people don't need that. Most people just need a functional report. I've kind of covered this a bit. Just, you know, when you're on council and you have an engineer, the engineer, as long as you get the right type of engineer, it's going to be qualified. But, you know, make sure you are getting what you want, because a lot of cases we find they're done by a technician or an EIT, engineer in training. The disadvantage with an engineer, a lot of it is done as lost leaders. The thing also, if they find something that's critical, the engineer can sign paperwork and the council must do it immediately. And it's typically a little more expensive. Functional reports are a little more cost effective. It really does meet the needs of the act and the buildings. So what council should be doing is just expecting a functional report, but if they do get an engineer, talk to the engineering firm and see, make sure, are you getting, you know, if there's a price difference, are you getting like the engineered report, or are you getting the functional report? Okay, so when you're looking for experience, there's two types. There's basically four types of, you know, nationally accepted people to do them. Civil and structural engineers are kind of universally accepted. AACIs, which are the commercial appraisal designation from the Appraisal Institute of Canada, it's the senior one. Those are accepted in all provinces but New Brunswick, where they only allow engineers to do it. CRP, Certified Reserve Planner, is a national program designed by the Real Estate Institute of Canada to teach the methodology and how to write a report and do it. And the RFPP program is a national program designed by UBC. So these are the main designations that are used out in the industry right now. So when you are looking for experience, you want someone who can read strata plans and blueprints. The inspector, the person doing inspection, has some construction experience and an understanding what to include as a component. Not everything in a building goes into a depreciation report. The ability to read and interpret bylaws, minutes, easements, and titles. And because of this, not everybody, very rarely do you have one person that knows all of this. So what we find the best way to do it is to work as a team because no one person can do it altogether. In our firm, I have inspection people, and I'm the financial guy, and that's kind of the way we work it. Now, getting the best from your property manager. What happens within the property management business is many firms, they've got a list of preferred people, but they've got a list of preferred appraisers, and they've got a list of inspectors, and they've got a list of engineers. Depreciation reports require a certain set of skills. So, you know, we try to tell property managers that that should be a separate category alone. What we also find is in a wood frame building, as engineers are not usually required. If you're only get recommendations from an engineer, you should be asking why from your property management firm. If they say because you've got structural and mold issues, well, that's great. But if you don't, there's no reason why you need an engineer. Do they have providers that work in a team approach? We have done in some jobs where we have an engineer and us as a non-engineer. And the reason for that is that engineers are really great at inspecting the envelopes of buildings. But when you go inside a building, they're horrible at counting the number of doors in a building. You know, they really don't want to measure the carpeting or count the lights or that sort of thing. In high rises, sometimes what we've done is we've said to the engineer, or in a complex job, you take the envelope and we'll take everything else. And we split the fee, and we find that works very well. And if you're in a high rise, that may be a solution for you. Conflicts of interest, this is a big problem. Like I said, until they change the qualified people, you've got owners, occupants, and tenants of buildings and their families doing it. Stay away from that. Property managers and realtors, there's potential conflicts there. And contractors. There are some contracting firms around town that will do the depreciation report. It's a loss leader for them because it will give them a chance to be the sole bid, sole source of the knowledge of when work is required. And for example, if they say that, you know, there's a job that it's going to be $20,000, you know, in the summer next year, and then miraculously they're putting in a bid for $19,000 in April, and the Strata goes, oh great, he said it's 20, but it's going to be 19. So this is something that you know, I'm very wary of. A professional firm just come in, does a report, and leaves the building. I love this slide. It's fun, but that is how some stratas do look at depreciation reports. I will just say one thing about the yield exchange. The typical return on investments we see in strata corporations is between 0.75% and 1.25% in the CRF. And that's because it's their allocation between GICs and cash getting nothing. Using somebody like yield exchange, where you can do what we call laddering, where you can have like 50,000 in 5 years and 150,000 in 4 years and 300,000 in 3 years, where you time those investments to when the depreciation report says you're going to need the money, is an excellent tool to get a much higher return. So that's where somebody like yield exchange would come in. Now, one of the problems that we have in the industry is that there's no standards. So what we see is definitions called fully funded, scenario A, B, C, and D, adequate, recommended model, cash flow model, multi-tier model, and it just goes on. The solution is not to reinvent the wheel, is to follow the National Reserve Study standards or the standards of the Appraisal Institute of Canada, where you've got fully funded, benchmark, baseline, and threshold as the base models out there, and they all work into a system. The principles of doing a depreciation report is to design a funding plan where you have sufficient cash. Well, it makes absolute sense. The second one is to have what we call a stable contribution rate. So what this talks about is that the rate of annual increase should be the same each year. We work on a principle of the optimum contribution rate. So the optimum contribution rate is, and I don't have the table in the chart, is where you make up the difference between the construction inflation rate and the investment inflation rate. So basically, if you're getting, we'll say 1% on your inflation, on your interest account, and you're getting 3% construction inflation rate, you're losing 2%. So you add that 2% on an annual basis, you just add it to the 3% to give you a 5% as your contribution rate on an annualized basis. So this is something that fits very nice into this funding principle. The third is that it's evenly distributed among owners, so everybody pays their fair share. And lastly, it's fiscally responsible. And what we mean by that is that the council can recommend it to the Strata Corporation membership, and they won't get voted out of office. So this is what basically goes into a depreciation report. So there's some steps here. The default position is that the DR depreciation report, everything should be in it unless there's a reason to exclude it. So that means building components and common assets, whether it be on common or limited common property, are the main ingredients in a depreciation report. 2, things that are done in the operating budget are not done. So if it's repaired, replaced, or renovated under once a year, that means that it should be basically excluded. If it's part of a service contract, such as an elevator, where replacement is included, then it's not within the report. We talk about, sometimes we get into what we call sections. So I will just go into a section here. This is what a section complex looks like. They're all over town. You've got the retail section on the main floor. You've got residential upstairs. And then you've got the joint use, which is the parking, amenities, garbage loading, everything like that. They're defined by access and benefit. Now, what needs to be understood is that the depreciation report is written to the CRF, right? So there's one report per contingency reserve fund. And in the section building, each section has their own CRF fund. So that would mean that there's 3 reports. Privacy laws restrict someone who's not a member of another section from seeing the financial details of another section. However, the lawyers have also told us that even if you're in a section that's not being discussed, you have the right to read the physical details. So what happens in a structure like this is that we issue 2 reports. One report that has all the physical details of all 3 sections, but only the financial details of the joint section and, let's say, the commercial, and then another report with the financial of the joint use section and the residential. So that's how these ones are dealt with. And then we get into shared amenities between many strata corporations. This is a pool that we did, and that has to be done in a separate report, a little supplementary report. This can be like a pool or a road between many corporations. And the reasoning behind that, again, is a privacy legislation, because in this case, the primary complex, the details of the primary are of no interest and can't be disclosed to any of the other buildings that are sharing this particular pool. So that's why supplementary reports are done for shared amenities. This is called the pool table rule. Sometimes there's something that the Strata Council is just going to decommission. So you go into a new development and there's a pool table. And at the end of the 35 years, the life of the pool table, it's going to have to replace. But 20 years in, the Strata Council goes, we're not going to replace it. In that case, it's allowed to be taken out of the depreciation report, financial part, but a notation has to be put in just in case in the year 35, the council is made up of guys who want nothing but to bring back the pool table. So this is something that has to be put into the reports as a notation. And step 6 is we review what we call the threshold. So what this is a certain amount of money. Anything below is not included. It changes on the size of the Strata Corporation. Typically, it's 1 to 2% of the operating budget. And just think of it this way: if you're in a high rise, do you really want, the one chair in the lobby to be in your depreciation report? Probably not. Keeping with the technology part of this, we actually have we've done so many reports, we actually have built a web-based proprietary software. So we can do it anywhere. For example, we're going to be in the Okanagan at the end of the month. And in 1 week, we're doing 7 properties, and we can do that because we can put all the details into the software as we're going along. It meets all the Canadian and US organization standards. The Appraisal Institute the Appraisal Institute of Canada is the only organization that has standards for depreciation reports in Canada. The Community Association Institute does the National Reserve Study standards in the US. And the Real Estate Institute of Canada doesn't have standards in Canada, but it is the accepted methodology for how to do a depreciation report. This is a special announcement. If any of you guys are watching this, this is the first book in depreciation reports. It's coming out in mid-April, and it will be near an Amazon near you. If you have any interest, please feel free to send us an email. So if this is the point where we take questions, but if you want a quote, we have a quick quote thing at stratareserveplanning.com. So questions. Okay, there's a few questions here. He said, apologies I missed this, but are inspection reports and BECAs legally required? Well, I don't know what you mean by inspection reports, but I will talk about BECAs. Are they legally required? No, not from what I understand, but I believe a Strata Council would be negligent if it didn't get BECAs at the appropriate time. I do know of a Strata that refuses to get BECAs and now has a leaky condo. And if they had got BECAs when they should have, it wouldn't be that big a problem. And then, is there any action that can be brought against a depreciation provider who is not qualified and or has not completed reports in compliance with the Act. Okay, so right now, under the BC legislation, a dog is qualified to write a depreciation report. So the qualifications for doing a depreciation report in British Columbia are you're breathing, and the Strata Council has signed a contract with you. So at this time, the answer would be no. If someone has not completed within compliance of the Act, I can't give you legal opinion on that, but I think that's more of a contractual issue. We have another question. We're Bearland Strata, one shed, street lights, and road. The older building. This is the only building we have. How can they make us pay for a depreciation report? Bearland Stratas have to get depreciation reports, and it's just a fact. The cost being thousands of dollars. If you're saying someone wants to charge you thousands of dollars, I would suggest maybe you give us a chance to give you a quote. But they will become mandatory. Once they become mandatory, we expect that the financial institutions will make it mandatory to get a mortgage. So if you want a mortgage, you have to show your depreciation report. So, what I would do is work to get the best deal you can on a depreciation report. And we also got a question about what do we do with councils who want to admit certain components. Yes, we have run into this before. It depends on the type of component. If it's like a window or sliding doors or carpeting, there's no question that's going to be in the report. If it's like the strata goes, well, we're going to get rid of the pool table, then we can make a notation in the report and take the dollar value out. And that's within the standards. But when you have to have, we as providers have a level of professionalism that we have to maintain. So it does, if the council wants to get rid of components, it's our responsibility to say no, and it's going to be in it, and that's the end of the report. We offer a draft meeting with the council to go over items, but in the end, we have just said to some councils, this is it, and that's the way it's going to be. And we're just following the law. So sometimes that's the way it has to be. There is a question, is there anything to help councils to do the council's annual budget contributions for the CRF that don't cost as much as a depreciation report? It's hard to sell a product that some councils don't want. But what I will say is, you're welcome to make a spreadsheet up, but a depreciation report, a depreciation is a document made out to the regulations. There's no short form of depreciation report. The regulations, when they change the regulations, there will be no way to get out of a depreciation report. You will have to do it. And you will have to, there'll be designated qualified people who do it. So there are certain fly-by-nighters in the industry, they will be gone. We have one document The DR is a high-level planning document. What's your opinion about ensuring that a strata uses the report to develop a 5-year proper schedule so they predict how much the CFE? Yeah. So they are high-level planning documents. Most professional providers, instead of just putting out that 30 years, will break it down to the components in a schedule, and for every 10 years or every 15 years. Some people will even break it down a little further. It's up to people who want to get a depreciation report to get a sample, to know what they're looking at when they're thinking of getting the depreciation report. I would say, because we probably have a lot of self-managed here, that people should look to CHOA or VIOZA, people on those lists of providers for firms, and maybe if you're a little worried that you're going to get some fly-by-nighters, is just see how long that they've been doing depreciation reports. We're well into our 13 years, so we've been around for a bit of time. So that yeah, that's basically it. Make sure that you get a sample. Make sure your quote works. Most providers will provide a renewal rate, which is less than your original rate, and the reason for that is they've already measured the whole place once. If you've been charged $5,000 to do a depreciation report, and they're saying the next one's going to go, 52 3 years later, that makes no sense to me. There should be a discount in the second year, the second report, even though it's 3 years later, because a lot of the work has already been done. Okay, I said there's a question. I am new to council and see our depreciation and reserve fund study consultation appraisal report was confirmed by a real estate consultant. How do we know they are qualified? Yeah. So a depreciation, okay, so just a bit of language. A depreciation report is used in British Columbia. Reserve study or reserve fund study or reserve plan is used elsewhere in North America. Now a consultation, a reserve fund study consultation appraisal report, I'm going to guess was done by an appraiser, because reserve fund is not an appraiser, not an appraisal. It's a different documentation, and under CUSPAP, the rules that appraisers work under, it's done under a separate set of rules. So how you qualified, that was the decision of the last council. I'm not going to get into that, but I'm just saying, going forward, you want to see a sample of the report from all your providers and some longevity. I got another question. We have a depreciation done by a qualified person. We have a council member who wants to insist the person include things that the qualified does not feel need to be included. Well, we don't often get that. There is a flow chart to decide what goes into a depreciation report. I went through it earlier. If something is not on that flow chart, then it basically should be excluded. Yeah, our firm does do depreciation report reviews. So, if this is an issue, please feel free to give us a buzz about it. Our phone number is on the slides, of course. 608-6161 here in Vancouver, and we have, of course, we've got an office in Victoria. Any other questions? So how often should we get a renewal report? Okay, so under the legislation, it's every 3 years. There was some talk about going to every 5 years, but after the building fell down in just north of Miami, insurers throughout North America are now going to 3 years. If you have a reserve study in the States and it's longer than 3 years, good luck on getting well-priced insurance. And that's eventually what's going to happen here as well. So every 3 years is the issue. Okay, so this is a good question. I have a client that is purchasing a condo in a 30-year-old building where the majority of owners voted against the depreciation report. What are the possible ramifications? The possible ramifications are your guy's going to get killed financially. The most work in a building comes every 25 to 35 years in that area. If there's no depreciation report, it means that nobody's looked at the possible expenses that are due. Between that 25 and 35 year lifespan, in a wood frame building, you're going to get a new roof. There's going to be a lot of windows that are going to have to be bought, a lot of sliding doors, you know, some painting. So that is a high expense period. If your client wants to phone us up, we may be able to do quite a fast depreciation report. But yeah, going into a building with no DR, none ever getting it done, and at 30 years old is not a good idea, from my point of view. People are entitled to get a depreciation report when considering buy a condo. Yeah, that is a very good idea. There are people who now, if there's no depreciation report, even if it's a little older, 3 years, they won't even look at the building. So, you know, that is one of the best reasons for getting a depreciation report. Anonymous, I had to step away, but how do you know that the government is going to require all stratas to have depreciation reports? Bill 14/2020 provides that the government has the ability to pass a cabinet regulation requiring all stratas to have depreciation reports, but they haven't moved yet. Well, that's very easy to answer. I'm on the committee. I was on the committee as a subject matter expert on depreciation reports for the committee, putting together the regulations. I can't discuss what we talked about, but the reason the committee is there was to discuss mandatory. Now, in regards, for those who said, well, that's an NDP thing, it's well known that Mr. Todd Stone of the opposition is also in support of depreciation reports. So it doesn't matter which party is in power. In the next short while, depreciation reports are going to be mandatory. Depreciation report, the council, I'll just cover this last question. How much is it going to cost to get a depreciation report? How much is a depreciation report? I can only tell you what my firm does. Depreciation reports for a bare land strata, they start $2,500 to $3,000. If you're talking townhomes, the small ones start at about $3,500, and they can go up depending on there's clubhouses and how many clusters there are. Apartment buildings are in the 4,000 range, depending on how many components there are in there. So, you know, a little walk up with no elevator starts about 4,000, and it goes up from there. We don't want to discuss too much about pricing because I do have competitors, but if you do have a question about pricing, please feel free to go to Quick Quote and Nicole, my assistant, will get a proposal to you.
Awesome. That was really great, Jeremy. Tons of information, wealth of knowledge, as always, and tons of questions. That was really good. We got just a ton of questions that came in, which is awesome. I hope that really helps alleviate some of the concerns that people had, and just informs everyone again about depreciation reports and how they're really beneficial to their properties. So yes, and also I'd like to congratulate you on your book that's coming out. I'm definitely going to be picking up a copy and giving it a good read.
Yes, we'll be putting up a link to some bookstores and to
Yes,
Amazon mid-month.
perfect. We'll
And
be sure to let our subscribers know. Okay, we'll
well,
put it in
Ron,
the
I'll send
newsletter.
you a copy. You can have a free
Awesome.
copy.
Bonus. Great. Yes, thanks for having you again today. Right, we really appreciate it that you came on, and we're gonna keep on seeing what good content we can come up with, and work with you in the future.
Okay.
Thanks again, Jeremy.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.